What's going on, guys? I got a fun one here today. We're going to be talking about MP5 lighting options throughout time, how they were used at the time, how it transitioned throughout time, and sort of how they're used today, not in the same way they were used before. At the end of this video, I'm going to leave a link to a video that inspired me for this. If you're not into or follow 9-hole reviews, you should definitely check them out. They produce great content, and their video on this topic really gave me the inspiration to put a video out similar to that. And as always, thanks to Target Shooting Solutions for letting me use the range for this video. Appreciate their support. If you're ever in the Avondale, Pennsylvania area, stop down, see the facility. Huge 27 lanes. All right, so the first round, we got the old school Operation Nimrod inspired build. So this is very close to what was used in the early 80s in Operation Nimrod. So what they did was, back then in the early 80s, weapons mounted lights was in its infancy. There was nothing, really. So what guys were doing, what these operators were doing bush builds. They were taking what they had and building what they needed for the particular job, right? So in this particular build, in the famous depictions of the storm of the embassy, Operation Nimrod, it was seen with mag lights and other old school lights attached to MP5s via the old school claw mount, and then attached to the claw mount with these sort of gasket, just, hardware store gasket clamps. And then using just a single point sling, stock collapsed. They're pushing out and using the light as their aiming device, right? So pre-time of, red dots and things. There were some lasers, but, operating at night in the dark, they needed some illumination. So as you're seeing in this footage of me shooting, there is some height over bore issues there, right? But in the close quarters, it's not gonna be as big of a deal. And using the light as an aiming device, the benefit to the old school mag lights is the bezel is adjustable. So what you can do is you can adjust this to make the light more of a flood or more hot. So depending on the situation, inside maybe you need a little bit more flood, maybe need a little bit more pinpoint, but regardless, in those CQB situations in a very close quarters, you can have more of a flood and not so much a pinpoint, but you can see here shooting, pinpoint does really work. And then if you're using just line of sight to aim, using the light, you can adjust where your bullets are hitting as you're shooting, right? So it's easier to see, obviously, on a paper target. I can sit here and move the gun and say, oh, I'm hitting a little low, I want to hit a little higher. I just move the gun up a little bit as I'm shooting and adjust on the fly. So that sort of thing would be done as well, but in full auto fire, shooting at live targets, you're not going to get as much of that. You're going to rely on knowing where your holds are for the light and making your adjustments that way. Second round, we're using just the old school Surefire lighted handguard. So post using that Nimrod setup, we'll call it, lights then move down to the bottom. They use clamps and large lights just like that on the bottom. So there was the need, right? So companies, Surefire and others, created an integrated light into the handguard. So now what you've got is a much closer light to the muzzle, which, as you can see, these are used. So as you can see, this is what kind of where you would see running no muzzle device. The light obviously would start to get degraded and damaged over time. But what was nice about these was now your height over bore is very minimal. The light is very close. The downside to these lights, though, is, as you can see while shooting, the light isn't as hot. Not a hot center, it's more flood. So on the target, you're getting more of a whole flood. So when shooting, and as you can see, only not using the red dot is off, only using the flashlight, now it becomes just a little harder to find that target. Now, obviously, you're using the light as the aiming device, so you're gonna be hitting the target at that close distance. But you may not be as pinpoint because you don't exactly know where that hot center is on this light. So more flood, everything is more illuminated, so your shots aren't gonna be as precise with a more floodlight like this, but it still is a great option using these lights in conjunction with other things, and it still can be used, obviously, just it's gonna be better with that mag light setup where you can adjust how hot the light is. You cannot do that on these. It is fixed. So this is your classic. I wanted to do like a classic, you know, late 90s, early 2000s SWAT team setup with the old school 512 EOTech and the old school Surefire lighted handguard. I believe this is the 628, if I'm not mistaken. Just a classic momentary pressure pad and the old school just incandescent bulb. So at the time, LED wasn't a thing still. So incandescent, very low lumens was what you had to deal with. Then finally moving on to a more tactical, new school, very modern type of build. We have KAC pick rail handguards, a more modern red dot optic, and the light we're using for this one is the Cloud Defensive LED light, momentary and constant pressure pad. So the things you got with these in the more modern times is obviously, as you can see, very, very bright, very high lumens, very cool light, so more bright, not as warm as the old Surefires with the incandescent bulbs. So, you know, pros and cons to that style of light and to that many lumens. So inside CQB, that bright of light isn't always the best because you're getting a lot of wash, especially over light colored walls and white walls. You're getting a lot of reflectiveness back from those walls, which could potentially, you know, damage your vision. And I say damage, I mean obstruct your vision in a way that you may not be as effective shooting because it's so bright. So a lot of times these lower lumen lights, like on the Surefire and on the mag light, it's more ideal because it's not damaging you, but still bright enough. If you're pointing it at somebody, they're gonna be a little disoriented and not know really what's going on. So these sort of lights are gonna be best for outdoors, more of a distance. Not saying, you know, crazy distance is 200 yards because you're not gonna engage really with something like this at 200 yards, although you could. These lights will be best suited outside just because of how bright they are and how high lumens they are. Still can be used, as you can see here, shooting even at 15 yards with this light, only using the light as an aiming device. It floods the whole thing. There is that hot center, so it is still doable. It's just very, very bright. So again, this depends on what you're looking for, depends on the application. This is the more modern setup with a modern light. The other two are the more old school lights. So again, moving up with 3 different versions over time, you have old school, antiquated technology, the very bare bones beginnings of lighted weapons, to the more modern style setup with very small, very bright lights. All right, guys, so really that's it. I was trying to have just a fun little video here on weapon lights on the MP5, sort of the history through it. Again, I'm gonna leave a link at the end of this video to 9-Hole Review's video they did on this. They do a lot of great stuff, a lot of great information, very historical accounts, all of the good stuff. And I thank them for releasing that video because it really inspired me to do a similar video. And to anybody that may not follow them, that follows me, I wanted to sort of get that information out a little bit too. But definitely check out their video. Link will be at the end of this video to do that. So all right, guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget Steve MP5 on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. See you next time.